Good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? I'm glad to see you all here for Café Sci on this fourth day of April, 2022. My name is Brad Peroni. I am your host for this evening. Before we get into tonight's presentation, I would like to take a moment to thank PPG for sponsoring Café Sci. I'd also like to thank all of you kind people for being here, and if you'd like to continue to support Café Sci and see this program grow, of course, we accept any kind of monetary donations for Café Sci, but perhaps the most important thing you can do is bring a friend, and then bring another friend, and then bring an enemy. Bring as many people as you can to Café Sci. We want to see this room filled up like we had several times before something happened in 2020 that forced us to go online for a while. So, with that said, it is my distinct personal and professional pleasure to introduce Dr. Andre Samuel, founder, president, and CEO of the Citizen Science Lab. Dr. Samuel was raised in Washington, D.C. and graduated from the University of the District of Columbia with a degree in biology. Following graduate study at George Washington University in genomics and bioinformatics, he received his PhD in biology from Duquesne University. At Duquesne, his research focused on studying the structure and function of the cold shock-related proteins in E. coli. As a PhD candidate, Dr. Samuel founded the Sigma Science Mentorship Initiative, a summer study program designed to introduce diverse ninth graders to the university's lab with the long-term goal of encouraging the pursuit of careers in scientific research. Dr. Samuel's research experience includes studying toxicology and carcinogenicity effects of novel drugs, hookworm vaccine development under the direction of Dr. Peter Hotez, and tuberculosis reactivation in non-human primates in the laboratories of Dr. Joanne Flynn. Dr. Samuel has a passion for STEM education and life science research. He believes that creating fun, engaging, and hands-on lab experiences for people is the best pathway to an interest in STEM. Folks, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Andre Samuel.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad, for that awesome introduction. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to talk to you today about a couple things. We'll do a brief intro into the Citizen Science Lab and a little bit about what we're about and why I founded the Citizen Science Lab and why we exist. And then we'll get into some of this data, which I think is really compelling, and that is the science textbook survey that we just recently conducted with some students who attend the lab, as well as some faculty from the University of Pittsburgh and a cohort of educators and researchers. Right? So I also want to say that before I get started, this work was made possible by the Shifting Power Collaborative and Remake Learning Network, and it was funded by the grant makers of Western Pennsylvania. And without this funding, this research, and many of the other projects that were done along with this would not have been funded or would not have been able to be carried out. So big thank you to them. All right. So, here we go. So we'll talk a little bit about the Tcso history, right? So as mentioned before, I started a small mentorship program on the campus of Duquesne University. It was my first year in my PhD program. I was the only black person in the program. I was the only black person in that program for the 6 years it took me to accomplish my PhD. But within the first year, there were a couple of things that just hit me right away. One were a bunch of questions from faculty who were like, "You're like the first black person I've seen in about 10 years walk through this program, these program doors. Where are the rest?" And then other things like the lab sat open and unused during the summer. And I noticed that we were right in the heart of downtown, right at the foot of the Hill District, and there was a wonderful opportunity for us to do some outreach and change the demographics. So maybe a few years from now, those same faculty would be like, "Oh, okay, great to see you," right? Instead of "Where is everyone?" So that started the Sigma program. And then when I graduated and defended, I was very lucky that faculty took notice of the program. Dr. Alan Siebler, who was the one that helped me get the Sigma program started, noticed that the program was going well. It ran the entire time that I was there working on my PhD, and it only ran during the summer for 1 week. And we saw that these kids came back every summer. And all we did was do science experiments with them. We didn't lecture them, we didn't give them slideshows, we just said, hey, here's what we're going to do, now you're going to do it. And so that led to the staff taking notice, and then in 2014, when I defended, I was able to come right out of graduate studies and start the Citizen Science Lab, essentially. Dr. Seidler had worked with a partner at Urban Innovation 21, Mr. Bill Generette, who is now at Duquesne University. And we worked together to create the program, right? We got our seed funding from McCune. That was our first $500,000, and we've been running ever since. We became a standalone nonprofit in 2018, which was 2 years ahead of the 5-year mark that we had planned on doing that. Right? The way that we serve the community is through a number of different programs. We serve the community through what we call our after-school initiatives. These are grant-based programs that are funded by the foundations such as the Heinz Foundation, the McCune Foundation, the Eden Hall Foundation, of course, the Richard King Mellon Foundation. They fund these programs, and these initiatives are designed to specifically target kids in our community, okay? And work with the Pittsburgh Public Schools and work with the charter schools to make sure that we recruit and retain students and expose them to hands-on STEM with a purpose. So examples like that include the Search program, which is a robotics program, but it's an aquatic robotics program. And at the end of the year, they compete. And when they compete, we take them on a trip to wherever the national competition is, whether they qualify for the competition or not. And then we take them and we explore things about our history. We went to Atlanta one year, so we went to the MLK site, we went to Ebenezer Baptist Church and things of that nature, right? And then of course we have a good time and we come back. The students stay with us for usually throughout the entire middle school and high school careers, all right? We partner with organizations and schools to make sure that this happens. During COVID, we of course could not serve in person anymore, so we had to pivot. And we went to what we call our cyber programs, or field trip in a box. And that meant that what we would do is we went to all the curriculum that we have, all the experiments, and we said, hey, what can we box up, safely pack, and go ahead and carry out via Zoom with our students? And so that's what we did. We created these boxes and these kits. We put everything they needed for a week long of experiments, and we sent those out. And then we were able to reach people in Arizona and Tennessee, California, and really expand our reach. But really more importantly, be able to provide stimulating, hands-on experiments and science and education opportunities for people through a very difficult time, right? And so that allowed us to really reach. And all in all, we've been able to reach over 4,250 students since our inception in 2015. See, if I forget anything else. Oh yes, we do scholarships here through donations from the public. And I think that was the only one I missed. Yes, all right. All right. Put my glasses on so I can see. All right. Never fails, always go back one slide too many. Okay, there we go. All right, so here we go. All right, so given this, I eventually arose and sort of became this activist for STEM. All right, I thought it was important that I had to address the prevailing misperception of scientists, first of all. If you think about media and you think about how scientists are often portrayed in movies and television shows and the like, they're not often portrayed in a very positive light. Doesn't matter whether they're white or black. But if they are black, they are usually emasculated, they're very nerdy, they look like, you know, characters like Urkel come to mind from Family Matters. You know, the scientists are usually the evil scientists and they're fighting the good person. And they've gone wrong. So there's a prevailing misperception of scientists, right? So I want to address that. I want to create a STEM pathway for our students, a pathway that was created and curated for our community by our community. I thought that was very important. I also want to make sure that I campaign for quality STEM education in our communities and everywhere else. I felt like everyone should have access to this. What we have found since we've been here is that even some of the top school districts in the area don't have the resources that we have at the Citizen Science Lab. So we're able to fill a gap across all spectrums. We also wanted to make sure that as an activist, you have to use current data to formulate your plan and your strategy, right? And so I want to make sure that I share some of the current data with you so you can kind of understand why we are pushing towards this increase of Black and brown students in the sciences, okay? There we go. All right, so here's our first graph. Now, there's a wonderful resource. If you've never heard of it, the NSF, National Science Foundation, has this survey of earned doctorates. It is this wonderful data that is beautifully published every maybe 2-4 years or something like that, and it is essentially an analysis of all the doctorate degrees that have been handed out in the United States. One of the things that we can see right away with this chill, all right, so purple is going to be your science and engineering fields, and green is going to be your non-science and engineering fields, and of course this is your total, right? So we can see that as time has gone, right, from 1958, the data shows that over the years, the number of doctorate degrees handed out in the US overall is steadily increasing at a very positive rate, all right? And then if we look at and break that down even further between the two fields, what we can see really is that non-science and engineering fields are really kind of leveled off and not progressing much. But there is a steady rise in the number of doctorates that are handed out in the science and engineering field, all right? So it is definitely, as we say, everyone says, STEM is growing, it's constantly growing. Yes, it is. It will continue to grow, and we are still creating doctorates. There we go. All right. We can break that down even further. And the survey of earned doctorate breaks that down even further and takes a look at now sex and field of study of doctorate recipients. All right. And so the orange bar and the line is going to be males in STEM and engineering fields. Males in non-STEM and engineering fields are in purple. Females in STEM and engineering fields are in blue. Female and non-STEM engineering fields are in green. And what we can see that is steadily increasing since 2020 is that males and their presence have been steadily increasing when it comes to the number of doctorates that are being obtained. What we do see is that with females since 2020, it is steadily increasing, but again, there's still a gap between male and female, okay? What is, again, according to the data that we saw previously, pretty much laying flat for both, but still has a small gap. Non-science and engineering fields are pretty much steady across the board here, right? So roughly about 3.6 times higher than the non-STEM field is what I calculated when I looked at this. There we go. I think I got the move now. All right. All right, so now, all right, we can look at this even further, and I think they did a really good job. I thought this was a great slide because now it breaks it down by US citizens and permanent residents and temporary visa holders. And the reason why I thought this was really important was because one of the narratives that we often hear is that immigrants and people from across seas and overseas are coming over and taking our engineering and our science degrees, and they're going back over and taking that knowledge with them and not using it here. And this data, and I don't recall if I added the other slide because I don't think I did, but this shows you that one, that's not true. The number of US citizens or permanent residents is certainly the largest gap here. And that those who have temporary visa holders are really, really not getting as many doctorate degrees as those of us who are permanent residents and US citizens, okay? Roughly about 1.6 times higher than non-US citizens. The other graph, which did not show, yeah, I didn't put it in there. The other graph showed a graph showing the number of people who stayed in the US versus the number of people who left after obtaining those degrees. And what we found with that data was that there were many more people who actually stayed in the US versus going back when they actually obtain those degrees. Okay? We also get a chance to break this down even further, and now we get to look at doctorates earned by underrepresented minority groups, US citizens and permanent residents. And if you take a look at the bars here, you'll see purple, that's going to be Native American or Alaskan Native. Our blue bars represent Black or African American individuals who have obtained their doctorate degrees. And then Hispanic and Latino is this green bar here. All right, and what we can see, if you remember in the first slide, there was about 55,000 total doctorate degrees handed out in the US. And while this bar might look pretty impressive and look pretty high, especially when you compare it to Native Americans and Alaskan Native, which is really, really, really sad if you look at this. I mean, this is terrible. And it just goes to show sort of the effects of segregation in education, and how there's so many obstacles for minorities when they're going and trying to achieve things. But when it comes to this kind of blew me away. But then actually not really terribly surprising. But you look here, you can see that even as we are increasing in numbers, African Americans are still a little bit behind, and there's still a little bit of a gap when it comes to Hispanic or Latinx individuals who are pursuing these careers, all right? So with this 2,400, roughly 2,400 out of 55,000, is roughly about 4.36% of PhDs in the sciences are handed out to African Americans and earned by African Americans. This was another pretty compelling piece of data that I found, and I tell you why I think that, because our philosophy is learning by doing. Our philosophy is you can't be what you can't see. This data proves that and shows that more in ways than other. If you look, you'll see that the green bars represent individuals who have obtained their doctorates by highest parental education attainment. And this is from 2020 to 2000 to 2020. Green, neither parent with more than a high school diploma. And what we can see is that number is steadily declining when you're looking at the number of individuals who have obtained their doctorates and look at their background. Those who have had at least one parent with some college is pretty steady and doesn't change much. There's not much of an increase there. At least one parent with a bachelor's degree is a little bit higher, and we can see that that's increasing over these two groups. But what is even more phenomenal and was pretty awesome to see is that if you have at least one parent with an advanced degree, at least 40% of those PhDs are handed out to someone who has at least one parent with an advanced degree. Really sort of reiterating the fact that, you know, what you see at home really can kind of motivate our young and our youth to be something and to acquire something, but it really also reiterates the fact that you have to see it in order to want it and to achieve it. And so we were like, wow, this is pretty awesome. This kind of really proves what we're doing is working. And so we wanted to go ahead and figure out, well, what are some of the other obstacles that are preventing people from obtaining doctorate degrees? Sometimes it's underrepresentation, sometimes it's a lack of just seeing ourselves in these positions. There are these myths that we talked about as well, right? But sometimes I was like, well, is time a factor? Could time be a factor? Sometimes, you know, we want to get out and we want to start making money right away and start taking care of our families right away. When I say, I should say one wants to, right? And so maybe that's a factor. So then we took a look at the breakdown and this was really interesting. So if you take a look at the blue bars, these are all your life sciences PhDs. And here we have the number of years that it takes once you go into your first day of graduate studies and then to the time you finish. Life sciences average steadily across the board between 6 and 7 years. I was kind of happy to see that because it took me about 6.5 years to finish mine. And I had a cat in my PhD cohort and class, and he finished in like 3.5 years. And I was like, dude, like, come on. But he was also single, very young, didn't have any kids, wasn't married. spent 24 hours in the lab, right? So it was very different. He probably put as much work in within that 3.5 years. But I was happy to see that because I was like, okay, cool, I'm on time, and it didn't take me more than average. But what also is interesting, and that's about the same for engineering, humanities, math, right, physical sciences. What I thought was really interesting was like your non-STEM and engineering fields on average take longer, right? And what takes even longer, on average of about 12 years, are those who go into education. And then what was even, and I don't have that data, but what was even more compelling when I looked at that is when you look at the number of African Americans who go and pursue a doctorate degree, the majority of them go into education. And NSF had that data. They get their doctorates in education. And it's the longest pathway. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that our educators are paid less. They take more time to get these higher and advanced degrees, but they tend to get paid less. There's a lot less value, but a lot more work that goes into doing it. So that was pretty interesting data that I took a look at, right? And that I was able to present, and I said, okay, well, let's formulate a strategy and just, take a look at some other things. What about cost? Could cost be a barrier? A lot of individuals don't realize that a doctorate in the sciences usually doesn't cost you anything. And so maybe being able to present that data to students and say, hey, well, let's take a look at costs and how long. Oops, maybe I missed that one. Oh, here we go. Yes, costs. All right. And so what we can see is on average, when you look at the NSF data, all right, the majority of individuals who are obtaining their PhDs are not paying for it from their own resources. Most of them are getting them through teaching assistantships, which I got. I had a teaching assistantship. I had to TA when I was in Duquesne University. I can't believe I forgot. When I was there, and the only way that you could get out of it was if you got a research assistantship. And that was pretty awesome for me because that was the first time I really got a chance to teach. I was very nervous about it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. We had to do these mock teaching sessions before we were kind of released, before we got to teach the actual undergrads. But I fell in love with it. And I quickly realized that I honestly just had a knack for it, and that the students gravitated towards me. And that I was able to, I think, instruct them in a way that some of my fellow TAs just couldn't figure out how to do it, right? And so we had options to do research assistantships, and you could apply for them, but I never applied for them. Prior to getting into my PhD, I had actually done about 6-7 years of research. And so as Brad had mentioned, I'd worked a few years like under Dr. Hotez and Dr. Flynn. So I didn't really need the research assistantship experience. I just wanted to teach and finish my thesis and go finish taking care of my family, right? But then others include fellowships, scholarships, and dissertation grants. And so that's roughly about 75-80% of those degrees are covered. And on top of that, a lot of us tend to get stipends on top of our tuition being waived. So, only about 20% of people are using other resources other than that to get that. So that's not really, now we have to start getting that message out that is not a barrier. And you'll be surprised, a lot of students that come through our doors don't understand that, don't realize that. And a lot of students also don't really understand that a master's is a terminal degree. They often think that they have to do a bachelor's, then a master's, than a PhD, and that is not the case. It's not always the case. And so there's a pathway from your bachelor straight into the PhD program. So making sure that we present all this data to our students in a way to not only, have them understand some of the barriers that we have, but also try to motivate them and help them understand that there is a path forward for them in STEM. And so this is a table that sort of breaks everything down, all that NSF data. And what we can see is that when it comes to this, right, we have our total number here and this is US and permanent residents only. This is not considering the non-US and the visa students. We have a total here of about 24,000. The next smallest subdivision here is Hispanic and Latinx, so that's about 2,000. That ends up being roughly 8.2%. And then the next group, which is broken down even further, is not Hispanic or Latino. That's 22,493 total for 91%, 92 if you round it up. And then that's broken down further. And what we can see is out of that group, certainly the largest group of all are white Americans, which counts for about 71%. And then that calculation was about right that I conducted. Black and African American students who are obtaining their PhD is roughly around 1,400, and that's about 5.7%. And so, you know, it's increasing a little bit because, to be honest, the first time I heard these statistics, I think was in 2002, when I was at UDC, and I was in Atlanta, and Dr. David Satcher, who was the Surgeon General at the time, was a guest speaker at a event I went to. And that was the first time I heard the statistics, and he said at the time that the number of PhDs that have been handed out that were obtained by African Americans was about 3%. So we're making some stride, but we're really, really, really trying to change that. I think that with recent DEI efforts, I think that with a lot of the universities really trying to sort of own up to what, you know, has really been done as far as, you know, opportunities and all of these things, and being able to like really open up their doors to the communities, I think is making changes. I anticipate this data will be updated maybe 24, and I'm really excited because I think those numbers might change as well. So the issue then is, look, I've done 12 plus years of science education, hundreds and hundreds of highlights and notes and notebooks. Do we have any actual scientists in the audience? Do we have any? What kind of science? Biology. Okay, okay. Grad or undergrad? Okay, okay. Leninger's Principles of Biochemistry? Yep, right? That's the standard. How many highlights? Or I don't know, nowadays they're probably doing the digital version, right? But you have certain standard books that are essentially the Bibles of some of these courses, right? That we've seen all our lives. Hundreds of notes. I can't recall a single Black person that was profiled in any textbook that I have ever seen through all the years. And I've attended HBCUs and I have attended PWIs. I attended 2 HBCUs. First one was Tuskegee University. I was a pre-vet major. I took plant and soil sciences at Tuskegee University, and my professor not once uttered the names Dr. George Washington Carver. Right? So I attended another HBCU in DC. There's 2 HBCUs in DC. Prize time. Anybody know what the 2 HBCUs in DC are? I got a free water bottle for you. Howard. Okay, and the second one should be a clue. Brad told you in my intro. UDC. Who said UDC? Okay, there you go. Yay, water bottle. All right, great, great, great. So, you know, I have no recollection of a single Black author of any of the textbooks. And so I was thinking to myself, is this real? Well, we got the opportunity to take a look at it and analyze it. And we got that opportunity through a group called Shifting Power. And so now we got a chance to sort of shift the power and shift the direction of research, right? What we did was we got a group of Black and Latinx educators together, and we decided that we have to be better supported to lead these conversations about improving educational practice, about improving this, and particularly for Black and Latinx youth. And so what we did was we held multiple sessions to examine the issues that were most passionate to us. We also identified these issues, and we identified which issues were not being addressed by traditional researchers or research methods, and then that allowed us to pick and choose what we were able to do. For 18 months during the pandemic, from 2020 to 21, 20 educators and 20 researchers got together and participated in the design and implementation of this innovative, equity-focused research project. And this positioned Black and Latinx educators as research leaders. And essentially what happened was, instead of us submitting our ideas to get funded, we got funded and we sat down and we thought about what we really want to do with this funding and what is a way to sort of really try to figure out how to change the narrative and the shift for Black and Latinx folks in STEM. And so for me and my group, I decided that the textbook analysis was what I want to look at. And so we decided on our research methods. These are actually some of my old textbooks. Sure. Those of us who, I'm sure plenty of us have our old textbooks around, right? These are some of my old textbooks. But what we decided to do, because I started looking through them when I asked that question, is it real? I said, all right, well, let me go back and look through them. I started looking through them. And I said, all right, I'm gonna put a sticky note everywhere I see a brown face, and I got one sticky note sticking out one of my textbooks. So I was like, all right, I have to really dive into this. And so what we decided to do was we decided to gather science textbooks and online resources from 2 HBCUs. We also decided to take a look and gather those same resources from 2 predominantly white institutions of learning. We had students at the Citizen Science Lab come in and do the examination and tally the results. And then, you know, our purpose, of course, with any research was to communicate the findings. All right, so here is some of that data, all right? So the first thing we did was we looked at authors, and we looked for these specific groups, these specific divisions, and we found that overwhelmingly 87% of the authors who wrote the books and the resources were white. We found that 1% of them were Asian, and 12% were Black and African American, and we did not find any Latinx authors at all. When it came to the profiles that were highlighted, so in our text, we decided to look for 2 things. We decided to look for profiles that had photos and that highlighted that individual. When we say highlight, we mean it had text sort of talking about the great things that he did or contributed to, all right? And we found that overwhelmingly 91% of those profiles were of white individuals. We found that 5% belonged to Black and African American people who were highlighted, and then 2 and 3% respectively for Latinx and Asian. And then we said, okay, well, we see a lot of pictures, and not all these pictures have profiles. So let's take a look at just some of the pictures that are there sort of illustrating people, you know, doing stuff in the lab and maybe, you know, pipetting or whatever, you know. And so they looked through and they found, again, sort of very similar pattern, a little bit less, but still certainly the majority of images that were there, 63% were those of people who they identified or we identified as white. We did have a little bit of a jump. 18% of those photos were of people that we deemed or categorized as being Black or African American. 5% were Latinx, and then 14% were Asian, a slightly larger increase for those groups. Then we said, well, let's look at gender, all right? And so we found that 19% of the profiles that were highlighted were women, so they were a minority. Again, overwhelming 81% of those profiles were of men. But then when we looked at the pictures that had no profile, we saw a nice even split, about 50-50 between men and women. We then did a faculty survey. because I thought this was interesting. I was like, remember, this is collective from 2 HBCUs and 2 PWIs. I thought for sure I was going to see a difference with Howard and UDC, but we didn't. We saw a very slight difference, but nothing significant. And so I said, all right, well, I wonder if faculty or professors are even thinking about this issue. So I said, let's send out a survey to a group of faculty at all 4 universities. And then, let's ask them just some basic questions about text and choosing it. And this isn't everything, but I think these are the key points that we found. First, we found that 70% of faculty use textbooks that highlight accomplishments of scientists in that field of study. They purposely choose textbooks that highlight scientists. 66.7% of faculty surveyed say there are profiles that are not commonly seen in these textbooks that they would like to see. 100% of the faculty surveyed agree that highlighting more diverse scientists would motivate more Black students to become scientists. Okay? And then 100% of them also believe that textbooks do not highlight enough Black scientists and their contributions to the field of study. 98.9% of that faculty also believe that female scientists and their contributions to that field have not been highlighted in textbooks adequately as well. Then here's what's interesting. 50% say they never considered race or ethnicity of profiles in selecting the textbooks. But then, while 100% believe that textbooks don't highlight enough Black scientists, 50% of them say that they're happy with the profiles that are highlighted in their textbooks, and that is something that's important to them when they select it. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, right, when it comes to it. And I have to admit, for a moment, I was disconnected, even with teaching at the Citizen Science Lab. I'm teaching all these wonderful students, and I'm all about like making sure that they see an example of a Black scientist, and I was comfortable with the fact that I was that example, but I also didn't realize until later, like, hey, in these slides, we need to start highlighting the Black scientists that I'm running around saying no one else is doing. And so we made sure we started doing that and highlighting that in our slides. So sometimes, I think there's a saying, what high is the wave, but our eyes are on the ground sometimes, and lose focus and don't necessarily see the bigger picture. But we were able to make that correction. And so essentially the conclusion when we came to the end of this was that, first of all, what we thought was true was true. The majority of science textbooks and college resources are written by white authors, and therefore the overwhelming majority of the scientists that are highlighted are representative of the white authors writing those books. There are many opportunities to tie in well-known Black pioneers into science, and that's lost. If you're in an anatomy class and you're going over the circulatory system and you're talking about the heart, you're talking about blood, right, and the circulatory system, why can't we discuss Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, right, who did the first open heart surgery? If you are a botanist and you're teaching botany, you should be highlighting someone like Dr. George Washington Carver. If we're discussing your protein chemist, your biochemist, and you're teaching your students about hemoglobin and heme and blood, your direct connection there is Dr. Charles Drew, right? The pioneer of blood plasma and creator of the blood bank. So there are plenty of opportunities to do this. We just have to remember to do that. Faculty cares, but they haven't really considered ways to implement change. For Black students in STEM, a lack of colleagues from similar backgrounds and no representation in the text further isolates Black students. Okay? And that was real. It was isolating for me when I was at Duquesne. Not terribly, but there were times where I was just like, wow, like, I can't talk to anybody about the episode of Sanford and Son I just watched. So things like that can be isolating. The books chosen by HBU instructors tend to have slightly more diverse profiles. We did see that, but it wasn't drastically different. And then what we also found was very interesting. There was no representation of the LGBTQ community when it came to these texts and highlights. And then, of course, Native Americans, Native Alaskans' presence is terribly low. Something really needs to be done to sort of change that as well, right? We can't continue to let that dwindle. And so how do we change this, right? That's our problem. Here are my solutions. You know, if you're a lecturer, you can build your own slides to highlight connected Black scientists, like I just talked about. You can choose textbooks that highlight a diverse STEM workforce. You can make it known. You can say, hey, to the bookstore, publishers, or whatever, you know, we need you to get more diverse profiles in here. We're not going to buy any books until you do. There's no need to buy them nowadays, the way I look at it. With the internet and slides, I mean, we can get all this information without having to rely on this resource. So I would say that faculty has the power, teachers have the power to implement change. You just have to start doing it. And then spread the word, you know, spread the word about the data, talk about it. If you know individuals who are instructors and faculty in universities in science and engineering fields, talk to them about it. And get them thinking about it, because a lot of them may not have even thought about it. And so if you're wondering why it's important to have more Black doctorates in the sciences, I added this slide, and I just kind of want to communicate some of the things that I think are important how we contribute to society and our neighborhood. So doctorate recipients begin careers in large and small organizations. They teach in universities, and they start new businesses. It's imperative that our youth see examples of us doing that. But also what it does is it provides a pathway for people below us to come through the same path. Doctoral education develops human resources that are critical to a nation's progress, scientists, engineers, researchers, and scholars, right? So we contribute to the progress of this nation, right? We contribute to the advancement of technology, the advancement of medicine, the advancement of science. We need Black doctorates to be able to do that, for us and our communities and for all the other communities, but also to make sure that we have different perspectives and different ways of thinking, right? With new perspectives come a new way of thinking. With new representatives from all over the community, we get a vast sort of array of viewpoints that we can consider. We also tend to create and share new knowledge and new ways of thinking that lead directly or indirectly to innovative products, services, and work of art, right? For me, the Citizen Science Lab is a prime example of that. We contribute to a nation's economic growth, cultural development, and the rising standard of living. You know, making sure that we get more people involved in STEM not only allows us to address problems within our communities, right? But it also allows us to move upwardly financially and socioeconomically, right? I mean, STEM is a pretty lucrative career. You know, so it's another pathway for communities to move forward and get economic mobility. So that's it, and that's pretty much it. I do want to say that, hey, you know, we're having a fundraising event. It's a concert. We're going old school, pioneers of hip hop. So we're gonna have Big Daddy Kane, DOS Effects, DJ Jazzy Jeff, Slick Rick, Rakim, and Positive K at Stage AE, May 29th. So, you know, I encourage you, if you are hip hop fans, to come check it out. It's gonna be a phenomenal show. We're also working with the Carnegie Science Center to do a science show there as well for the opening. And then I just want to say a big thank you to the Carnegie Science Center for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful event. Please make sure you support them as well. And then I certainly want to say thank you to all of our funders and sponsors. Certainly, it's probably not exhaustive. I apologize to anyone that I've left out. But these are a large number of our current sponsors. the work at the Citizen Science Lab could not be done without them. I'm very thankful to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. That was fantastic. Loved hearing your talk tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to open things up for questions and answers now. While you're thinking of your questions and what you'd like to talk about, I would like to take a moment to let you all know that we will have this evening's presentation recorded and available on YouTube after this week is up. We'll have that online and ready. So feel free to share tonight's talk with a friend that you think might be interested, or maybe any educators that you know. I think we have lots of opportunities to spread the content of tonight's talk. And we'll also invite you now to ask any questions that you have. I have a microphone. Colleen up at the top has a microphone. We'll bring those around to you.
We've partnered together on events that we've thrown in the past called STEAMabration, which is this wonderful event where we have STEM providers and educators come out, and we have, like, bouncy rides and everything. So we've worked with them in the past. We do currently work with the Museum Lab right next door, and Manchester Academic Charter School, which is housed in the Museum Lab, has been a partner for our C-Perch program for the past 5 years. So yeah.
What is the cost of funding a scholarship to your summer program?
Oh, that's a great question. So the summer camps, I think, average around probably $300 per kid. And so we usually do, I think, about 12 to 14 per camp. And I think we run 2 camps per week. And so I gotta kind of do the numbers, but on average for a summer camp, which is a week long, it's about $300 a week when you think about aftercare and post-care. As far as the initiatives are concerned, those long sort of after-school programs that we do, those vary. The cost of that for, let's say, for example, with C-Perch, we put 60 kids, about 40 to 60 kids a year through C-Perch prior to the pandemic. And I think that was roughly about $150,000 a year that it would cost for us to put the kids through that program. But that is 29 weeks of programming. That's every week, 2 to 3 hours after school for the entire school year. And it also involves feeding them every week, making sure they have all the resources that they need, and it involves a huge trip at the end of the year where they get to just go out and have a blast for all their hard work. So those are some of the costs that are associated with running the program. Yeah.
Just thinking of the educational process, and so getting at the undergraduate level, I wondered, do you have some data on what the minority representation in STEM fields is at the bachelor's level?
No, haven't looked at it yet, but that's a great question, and I think that's probably next to dive into. We also want to expand this textbook survey. We're writing grants now to individuals and saying, hey, this is some pretty compelling data that we have. We think we need to dig into this beyond the 4 universities that we looked at, and then we're trying to get funding to expand that as well. So that would be a great opportunity, I think, as well for us to look into. Thanks. Yes?
Hey, thanks. So what are the age ranges for the camps?
Well, we serve K through 12 and adults. I believe the camps are going to be middle through high school.
Do you do any outreach in the South Hills of Pittsburgh?
So our location is, so we had 2 locations. Our first location was in the Hill District. And then we expanded to the South Hills. We actually have a flagship location in the South Hills. It's 5 different labs. It's in the Landmark building right off of Washington Road. And now the Hill District is temporarily closed as we work on a capital campaign. We're trying to obtain some land in the Hill and own this site outright and build a permanent facility. But yes, we are out in the South Hills, and 1699 Washington Road.
Awesome.
Second floor.
Thank you.
Yep.
For the kids that have gone through the program, how many of them have gone on to?
Quite a few. Let's see. There's Brianna. Came to us as a freshman when she was at Oakland Catholic, and is now a junior biology major at Howard University, and plans on pursuing a PhD. We have Ashley and Alexis. They are fraternal twin sisters. One is at Penn State as an engineering major, I believe. The other one is at Drexel as a biology major. We have Nyabingi, who is now a environmental sciences major at Lincoln University. We have quite a few. Quite a few of our students go off to pursue college degrees.
So the doctorate doesn't cost much, but the undergrad does. So what do you do about that?
Well, so we try to provide, we have a limited scholarship. The Maduro Award is one of them. And so Brianna was actually a recipient. But other than that, the only thing that we have the resources to do is to provide them with scholarship resources. And so in addition to the science, what we also do is we guide them through the process. And so what I've done for a student like Brianna, who has needed more resources to pay for college, is I've made sure that she got every resource that I came across. And she was a phenomenal student because she applied for almost every resource I gave her. And so, those are the types of things that we do with them on a more informal basis. We have just recently talked about how we're going to create more of a solid pipeline and support for those students in the future, looking forward.
So I'm a member of the American Chemical Society, and I know they have a project SEED for, I think, high school students to get them working in industrial labs. And I work at Covestro, so some of them come through there. I didn't know if you have any, it seems like that would be a good feeder group for some of yours to get them a more full summer exposure. And I didn't know if you knew anything about that or had any contact.
I didn't know anything about that, but it would be great because we do internship programs internally within the Citizen Science Lab, and so most of the time what happens is the student comes to us from one of the universities and say, hey, I have 20 hours of community service I need to do. Can I do an internship? Don't need any pay, just want to get credit. And then when they finish that 20 hours, they come back and say, okay, I'm ready to volunteer. Can I stay? Do you have any other positions for us? And then if they do well, they go through the volunteer, and then they actually become staff members and become what we call enrichment technicians, which are our part-time support. And then our enrichment technicians have gone on to become camp counselors and come back every summer and during the breaks and work for us. So the internship part and volunteering is a very important piece for us. We'd be happy to do it because it helps keep our students engaged. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? No? Yes. Well, programs for sure. I mean, I think that there's a number of great programs throughout the city, a number of great members of the Remake Learning Network that I think are doing really good work. Terry Smith of Empower House does a phenomenal job, and we partner with him on a regular basis. Urban Academy, which is a charter school, it's run by Mr. Chase Patterson. They are doing a phenomenal job, I think, in trying to make sure that the curriculum and education standards are also culturally relevant. Dr. Margaret Starks, who is the principal of Miller's African-Centered Academy in the Hill District, also does a phenomenal job in trying to make sure that the students stay plugged in with things that are culturally relevant when it comes to education. So yeah, 100 Black men of Western Pennsylvania are also doing a phenomenal job. There is the Black Male Leadership Institute. So there are certainly a number of organizations in Pittsburgh. Wow, I just can't. One Nation Mentoring is doing a phenomenal job. So yeah, there certainly are a number of us that are trying to make strides when it comes to making changes in the community, particularly in STEM. Yep.
I actually have a question as well.
Sure.
I'm a former high school teacher, and so have you done any sort of like informal survey with your students who come to your camps about their experiences in their schools? Because you're looking at, college textbooks, like you said earlier, they can't be what they can't see. So,
Right.
Is it almost too late at that point because they've already sort of entered academia? So have you looked into what their experiences are in their high schools?
Sure. No, and that's a great question. And again, but that is why we're looking for that additional funding, right? So that we can dig deeper into that textbook study, not only on the college and graduate level and across that, but also look at it in the middle schools and in the elementary schools and so on. Yes, we've thought about it. We want to do it. We're just trying to get the funding to expand it. Thank you. It's a great question. All right.
Do we have time for any other questions? If there's any more from the audience here. All right, well, if you have a question and you're feeling shy and don't want to get on the microphone, I'm sure if you stick around, Dr. Sam will be happy to chat with you for a moment informally here. And before everyone leaves here this evening, I would like to let you all know that next month's speaker for Café Sci, we get a double dose of speakers. We'll have Dr. Emily Woodward and Ian Lynch from the U.S. Geological Survey, a pair of geologists working here locally, and they will be on hand to discuss the current projects they're working on here in southwestern Pennsylvania. So we look forward to seeing all of you here a month from now, and hopefully you all bring maybe another friend or two with you, and we'll double this, and then we'll double it again after that, and we'll, by the end of this year, we'll have to find a whole new building to house Café Sci if we keep up with that exponential growth. Thank you all for being here so much. We couldn't do this without all of you, and thanks again to Andre Samuel.
Thank you. And if you ask a question, I got a water bottle for you if you want one.